Why do we treat the present as a means to the future rather than treating the future as a gateway into our own present? And when I say that, I don't necessarily mean living from the future, but I mean recognizing the impact of bringing future desires or future, feeling into the present moment. I'm recognizing more than anything that what is will be. And what that means to me is recognizing that everything that has a state right now, for example, myself or you, the way that we currently are is always going to reflect what will be. Not necessarily just in the sense of our action, not necessarily just in the sense of us being, but the result of our being, the result of who we are, the result of our experience. And if we can recognize that all we ever really experience in an external sense is our own reaction, is ourselves, because we are the experience, then we must subtly realize how we experience ourselves is our entire life. And in recognizing what is will be, and in recognizing our own power to transform how we feel about ourselves and our own perception of the world around us through ourselves, we sort of can open the door to a lot more. We can give ourselves the very keys to the reality, to the desires, to our goals that we actually want, so long as we give them to ourselves and not towards external circumstances. I think a lot of us want to be in the future so much that we disregard present potential. We disregard the idea that everything is a present. And if we are to have anything, it's always going to be within the present. So why not give it to ourselves now in a real feeling way? Not necessarily in a sense of just the physical achievement and our aspirations to do so, but in our mental achievement of actually giving ourselves the validity, giving ourselves strength, giving ourselves belief in knowing that we will achieve exactly what we set out to. I've recognized that whenever you make a distinct choice in your head as to how things are going to be for you, they typically go that way. And I don't mean that in the sense to say, oh, if you think this person's going to do this, they will. I don't mean it with other people. I don't mean it with manipulation. I don't mean it with anything immoral. I really just mean that everything that we are is always reflected back to us. If we're carrying some type of negativity within ourselves and within our psyche, we're going to see that and experience that in the world, regardless of how things look. And they'll continue to tend towards, and will continue to manifest things and bring things into our life that are representative of that feeling. But if we can give ourselves a happier feeling, or if we can give ourselves some type of validity, some type of strength, some type of self-love in the moment, having intimacy with the life that we live, then we can learn how to bring ourselves anything that we want presently, because everything already exists in a sense, because there's only one moment. I think sometimes we get so lost and caught up in the whole entire idea of time that we sort of stun our own growth and our own progression as individuals, because we think our growth has to be characteristic of a time past rather than a version of ourselves past, rather than a concept past or an idea finally gotten over. And I think a lot of us are just trapped in previous ideas. And that's why we see cycles so much more within the world around us. Because not only do we perpetuate them through our own action, but our perspective doesn't allow new things to actually exist. When new things do happen, we always reference them to old. And we think, oh, things are going right for me today. But typically they don't, or they're likely to do something different, or just an impending feeling of things not going our way, impending feeling of doom in a sense. And, I think that's something we prescribe ourselves sometimes unknowingly. And we think just because we have that feeling that things ought to go that way and things have to go that way when they don't. I always think it's about how you feel presently. I think how we feel presently impacts pretty much everything that has to do with our lives, because our lives are always lived in the present. There's no life that you can live outside of the present moment. You can reference previous present moments and reference your previous life, but you're not really living anywhere but where you are. And that's why I think the importance should always be placed with where you are. And in recognizing that what is will be, it's important to sort of have your own influence on what is. What is right now is not only what you see, but what you feel. Because what you feel is what you experience. That's the experience that we're going for. We're not going out here to get accolades just to have them sit there, but to recognize within ourselves the power of our own potential and to feel powerful within ourselves. And if we can recognize that it's always about a feeling, and we recognize that the feeling is always what brings the accolade in a way, then we have to give ourselves that feeling. I think sometimes we get addicted to the negative ways of thinking and negative ways of being. And we resonate with that so much that we actually do attract that into our lives. And I think if we want to attract something new, then it's about establishing something new. And I think the easiest gateway to that for me has always been actually giving myself a real audience. And what that means is paying attention to my thoughts and the way in which they take away from me or give to me in any given moment. And also watching my feeling, watching how I'm being swayed and pulled and pushed via my own thoughts. And in recognizing how I'm pushed, learning how to go with the flow in a way that actually allows me to continue to be in the moment and continue to find the things that I'm looking for, myself included. Recently, my entire idea of self-actualization or self-development hasn't necessarily changed so much as it's been given a new light. And I think that new light has been my own awareness, like giving myself a real chance at looking at life through my own perspective. I think sometimes we claim to look at life through our own perspective and don't really give ourselves the reins. Instead, we establish a relationship to the reins and understand that they're there, but don't actually take them. We still sort of allow our life to be lived in autopilot, not necessarily in terms of our actions, but in terms of our feeling. And if our feelings are our own and if our feelings are our experience, then we have no greater volition, no greater obligation than to give ourselves that which we want in feeling. If we want to be happy, then it's about establishing happiness through our present perspective and allowing that happiness to be without reference to every single thing in the world. I think when we allow our happiness to live in reference, we cease to be the subject. It ceases to be the subject of our experience. And instead, we become something that needs to be experienced by the world and reacted to rather than recognizing that our life is only based on our reactions. You can't always control how everything looks in a physical, real sense. I agree to that statement. But I think what we bring into our physical, what we bring into the world, whether or not it's determined by our perspective alone, is, I feel, always representative of what we've invested into ourselves, what we've invested into our minds, what we've invested into our worlds. We all recognize synchronicities, I think, at times. And when I say synchronicities, I really mean, like, for example, say you're thinking of somebody and then they miraculously call you. Or say you're looking for something and then all of a sudden it's right in front of you. Say you wanted this certain thing and all of a sudden it's there. Say you thought about a song and you've just been singing it all day and then someone else is playing it right next to you. There are so many things that I find subtly that sort of enforce this idea of synchronicity and connected beauty within the world around us. And I think until we give ourselves a chance to sort of let go of our previous selves and let go of our previous versions of ourselves and dependence on thought and dependence on previous feeling, then we'll actually begin to open new doors to ourselves, new doors to new understanding and new ways of being that actually contribute to the life that we want, rather than the life that we're trying to leave behind. Because it's not about trying to leave life behind, but recognizing that life is only a present thing. And if you want to leave something behind, it's about establishing something new within what is, so what will be characteristic of what is, because it always is. Whatever we are, if I'm constantly telling myself and fermenting this idea that I can't do something, then what will be is often me not being able to do that something. But if I give myself volition and understanding and a feeling at the very least, or a knowing that I can achieve exactly what I'm setting out to in the present, that I'm not only going to attract those things, but I'm going to see opportunities to actually go through that undertaking. I think sometimes we don't see steps because we haven't actually committed ourselves to being able to take them. Instead, we're waiting on the step to appear before we actually believe that we can take a step, or we're waiting on the step to be taken sometimes before we think we can take it. But that's sort of contradictory. We always have to be the ones who are at the forefront of our own action, the forefront of our own understanding even. So if we want to understand more, if we want to experience more, if we want to sort of live a new life, if we want to be able to change the way that we are experiencing the world around us, then we have to change the way we experience the world within. And I think it's always been that simple. But I think the simplest aspect isn't changing what's within, but recognizing what's within often has no connotation other than that which we give it. What's within isn't painted by anyone but us. And when I say that, I mean any type of negativity and any type of ill feeling that we feel within ourselves is always self-inflicted. Not in the sense to say that it's always caused by us in the sense of this event happened and I feel this way because of this event. But in a sense to say we allowed this event to make us feel this way about ourselves. And I don't mean that to say we don't have justification for doing so. But in recognizing that we want to change who we are, we want to change the way in which we experience the world and experience ourselves, it has to start with the ways in which we subtly take ourselves down and how we feel about who we are. And once we begin to, I guess, just love within who we are and love ourselves enough to change, love ourselves enough to let ourselves go in the moment, we'll recognize that who we are is more easily expressed than it is thought. And thinking isn't something that we need to do constantly in order to reach our goals. I think we can all recognize that any overzealous thought doesn't change the outcome of a situation, especially if thinking is the only thing that you can do about it. I think who we are should be more vested in our action, not necessarily just to say we shouldn't think, but to say using our minds as a tool, not a counsel, not something to constantly reference our biases and things too, but actually using our awareness to allow ourselves to be in the moment. Using whatever consciousness we have to allow ourselves to really be. And in allowing ourselves to be, we recognize that everything exists within a certain field of potentials. We have the ability to do so much. We have the ability to give ourselves so much. And until we actually make the choice to start giving, we'll always think that we have to receive before we give. And when I say give, in this case, I can mean give in terms of giving yourself a feeling, giving yourself volition, giving yourself validity, giving yourself a chance to actually undertake the things that you want, to actually give yourself, I don't know, the motivation, the discipline to actually care about the life that you live. And when I say care, I mean taking yourself seriously, not taking life seriously in the sense of being stressed by everything externally, but taking yourself seriously in the sense of recognizing that you can do as much as you allow yourself to. And when I say allow, I mean accept yourself to be able. When we allow ourselves to do something, I mean being vested within our action enough to not think about our ability to do the action. I think sometimes our answer is taken away by overzealous questioning. We question ourselves so much about this, about that, about whether or not we're able to achieve this, about whether or not this will happen, without deciding for ourselves how we want to be regardless of that situation. And what that means to me is not allowing our feeling about ourselves to constantly bend and change depending on things that don't really have to do with how we should feel about ourselves. How this person reacted to me. That has nothing to do with how I should react to myself. And I don't mean nothing to do with in a sense of not understanding how to interact or not understanding, the implications and consequences of your actions and expressions towards others. But to say, you don't have to reprimand yourself in every single expression you have towards others. I think we just have to be present enough to recognize the parts of ourselves that seek out change, or present enough to recognize the ways in which we've taken away from someone or ourselves through our own expression. But even so, I don't think that's something that needs to be done in a stressed way. I think we sort of can love ourselves through our own change and development, and love ourselves enough to apologize and actually open ourselves up to understanding. And in doing that, we sort of break down this barrier that our ego has built up around our whole idea of mistakes, or whole idea of doing the wrong thing, quote unquote, when there is no proper or specific way for you to be you. And in saying what is will be, I'm saying that we have every opportunity and every chance to be the way that we are, be the way that we desire in the present moment, and not necessarily wait. Like, why are we postponing ourselves? Why are we waiting to give ourselves that which we can only give? You can wait till the accolade says that you're this. But even if the accolade states that, the only reason that an accolade can state that you are a way is if you already are a way. And it's telling you that you are, just giving you some type of physical representation. But if we only depend on physical representation, we'll never reach anything, because signs follow, they don't precede. A sign of you being a great, I don't know, humanitarian, for example, isn't just the fact that you receive like a Nobel Prize or something like that. It's everything that you are that gets you that prize. It's not the prize that makes you start doing the humanitarian stuff. It's not the I don't know, we could bring this to like a sport or something too. Say you win a championship. It's not the championship trophy that brought you to play more games and win them. It's you winning games that brought you to the championship. And in saying signs follow, they don't precede, it's about acting as if you've already achieved that certain something, and understanding your own mental capacity to give yourself a feeling, or give yourself what you want and what you need now, and recognize that everything truly is already here in a way. You know, letting down your guard with yourself, letting down your guard with the moment, enough to establish what you want right now. Like in this moment right now, we have a choice. You know, we may feel a certain way, but we can imagine ourselves feeling differently in this moment. Like, I can imagine myself being even happier in this moment. And that happiness that I can imagine myself feeling isn't dependent on certain things. It's dependent on my allowance to allow myself to continually be more happy within the moment. And I think sometimes we don't necessarily need to just wait on certain experiences and outcomes to be happy within ourselves. I think we need to sort of give ourselves present happiness through our own perspective, through our own way of being, through making our happiness in reference to our own self-love and appreciation, and just appreciating the space that we take up, because it's ours, because this experience is ours. And if we can make our experience better through our own self-love, then we have to love ourselves enough to love ourselves sometimes. And that doesn't necessarily mean just doing the actions that are representative of self-love, because I feel like self-love in its most basic state is accepting what is, and accepting yourself as a part of what is, and recognizing you can change, because our state is constantly changing. From day in, day out, we can all recognize subtle parts of us are constantly changing, and they change so gradually at times we don't even recognize that change occurs. And that's why I think referencing our growth to time doesn't really work. What I think we need to do is allow our growth to be a present decree, a present conversation, because readiness, or being ready, is not a feeling so much as it is a decision. It's you saying to yourself, I am ready, and going out there to do the thing that you actually desire to do, not waiting on a feeling, then deciding you're ready. You know, we have to sometimes open the door to ourselves so we can actually walk through. And in recognizing that what is will be, then we can recognize that what will be can be anything that we can give to ourselves in the moment.